1. We're diving into the world of classic American sports cars with a 1980 Chevrolet Corvette that's up for grabs on Craigslist. This silver beauty is a real head-turner, but it's not without its quirks. First off, let's talk about the price. The seller is asking $11,500, which might seem a bit steep for a car that's over 40 years old. But hey, it's a Corvette, and these babies hold their value pretty well. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. The seller admits that the car is in fair condition, which is a polite way of saying it's not perfect. The odometer has rolled over, so it's hard to say exactly how many miles are on this thing. But with 100,000 miles showing, it's safe to assume this Vetta has seen some action. Under the hood, you'll find a throaty 8-cylinder engine that's ready to roar. The seller isn't sure if the engine and transmission are original, but the car does run. That's a plus, right? The tires are decent and there's a new windshield, so you won't have to worry about any cracks obstructing your view while you're cruising down the highway. But here's the thing, folks. The AC doesn't work, which could be a real bummer on those hot summer days. And the car might need an alignment, so it could be a bit of a handful to drive. But hey, that's all part of the charm of owning a classic car, right? The seller seems to be pretty upfront about the car's condition, which is always a good sign. The title is registered in their name, and the mileage is listed as exempt. So, if you're looking for a project car that you can tinker with and make your own, this 1980 Corvette might be just the ticket. Just keep in mind that the seller is firm on their asking price. They'll accept a reasonable offer, but don't try to lowball them over the phone or via text. If you're serious about this car, you'll need to go check it out in person. So, there you have it, folks. A 1980 Chevrolet Corvette that's ready for a new owner. It might not be perfect, but it's got a lot of potential. And who knows? With a little bit of elbow grease and some TLC, you could have a real showstopper on your hands. 2. We've got a real treat for you. A rare gem from the 80s that you don't see every day. Get ready to feast your eyes on this 1984 GMC Conquista, up for grabs on Craigslist for just $5,000. Now I know what you're thinking. What the heck is a Conquista? Well, let me tell you. The Conquista is the fancy-pants version of the GMC Caballero, which is basically a Chevy El Camino with a GMC badge. And let me tell you, folks, GMC didn't make a whole lot of these babies back in '84, so you're looking at a real rare find here. But enough about the history lesson. Let's talk about this specific Conquista. The seller says it's in good condition, and from the looks of it, they ain't lying. The suspension has been fully restored, front and rear, with new shocks, springs, ball joints, and even a new steering rack. This thing is ready to take on the road like a champ. Under the hood, you'll find a 305 cubic inch V8 engine that's ready to rumble. And get this, it's got positraction, power steering, and power windows. Talk about luxury. The original factory wheels are still on this baby, giving it that classic 80s look that's sure to turn heads. But the real kicker? The seller has done a ton of work on this Conquista since last Christmas. We're talking a new battery, alternator, carburetor, motor and transmission mounts, fuel pump, brake booster, heater core, starter, and even a new radiator. Oh, and did I mention the ice-cold AC? Yeah, this thing is loaded. Now, I know some of you might be worried about emissions testing, but fear not. The seller has registered this beauty as a collector car in Arizona, so you don't have to worry about any of that nonsense. And with a clean AZ title and registration, you can drive this thing off into the sunset without a care in the world. So what are you waiting for? If you're in the market for a rare, classic ride that's been lovingly restored and upgraded, this 1984 GMC Conquista might just be the one for you. And at just $5,000, it's a steal of a deal. But don't wait too long. I have a feeling this one won't be on the market for long. 3. We've got a real treat for you. A 1965 Plymouth Valiant that's been cherished and cared for like a member of the family. This beauty is up for grabs on Craigslist for just $14,500. And let me tell you, it's worth every penny. First off, can we just take a moment to appreciate the fact that this Valiant has been stored in a heated garage for over 25 years? That's the kind of love and attention that every classic car deserves. And it shows in the condition of this beauty. Now, let's talk specs. This is a two-door Signet hardtop model, which means it's got that sleek, sporty look that turns heads wherever it goes. Under the hood, you'll find a 225 cubic inch slant 6 engine that's ready to purr like a kitten. And with an automatic transmission and bucket seats with a console shift, this thing is a blast to drive. But here's the really impressive part. This Valiant is all original. That's right, folks. No aftermarket parts or modifications here. Just pure, unadulterated 1960s American craftsmanship. Of course, even the most well-maintained classic cars need a little TLC from time to time, and this Valiant is no exception. The seller has gone above and beyond to make sure this thing is in tip-top shape. They've replaced the upper and lower ball joints, the complete brake system, including the drums, the starter, the carburetor, the battery, and even the windshield and rubbers. Talk about attention to detail. And the best part? This Valiant isn't just a pretty face. It's mechanically sound and drives straight as an arrow. Plus, it comes with collector plates and a binder full of receipts and history about the car. So not only are you getting a gorgeous piece of American history, but you're also getting the peace of mind that comes with knowing your new ride has been well documented and cared for. Now, I know the price tag might seem a little steep at first glance, but trust me, folks, this is a serious collector's item, and the seller is looking for serious buyers only. If you're the kind of person who appreciates the craftsmanship and history behind a classic car like this, then this 1965 Plymouth Valiant is definitely worth a closer look. 4. We've got a real treat for you, a 1965 Lincoln Continental that's just begging to be restored to its former glory. This beauty is up for grabs on Craigslist for just $15,000, and let me tell you, it's a project that any true car lover would be thrilled to take on. First off, can we just take a moment to appreciate the fact that this Continental has been garaged for years? That's the kind of love and care that every classic car deserves. And while it may not be in perfect condition, it's got all the bones of a true survivor. Now let's talk about what makes this car so special. The 1965 Lincoln Continental is an icon of American luxury, with its sleek lines, spacious interior, and powerful 8-cylinder engine. And this particular example has all the features you'd expect, including power windows and seats that still function like a dream. Of course, like any classic car, this Continental has its share of issues. The seller admits that the engine leaks a bit and has some typical Ford Motor Company quirks. And there's some rust on the body, as well as some sun damage to the rear seat. But hey, that's all part of the charm of owning a vintage ride, right? But here's where this Continental really shines. The seller has collected a ton of parts over the years with the intention of restoring this beauty to its former glory. We're talking hubcaps, a headliner, a carpet kit, a rubber kit, window felts, trunk rubber, a trunk carpet kit, and even a shop manual. Plus, there are some MISC 8-tracks thrown in for good measure, although the seller admits they've never been able to figure out the 8-track player. Maybe you'll have better luck. And let's not forget about the little details that make this Continental truly special. The seller is including 2 Continental emblems, an oil pan seal, hood felt, and even a power antenna. It's clear that they've put a lot of thought and care into collecting all the right parts to make this restoration project a success. Now, I know what you're thinking. $15,000 is a lot of money for a car that needs work, but hear me out. This is a rare opportunity to own a piece of American automotive history. With a little elbow grease and some TLC, you could have a truly stunning classic car on your hands. And with all the parts included, you'll be well on your way to making that dream a reality. 5. We've got a bit of a fixer-upper on our hands. A 1985 Chevrolet Caprice that's seen better days. This classic sedan is up for grabs on Craigslist for just $3,000, but before you get too excited, let's take a closer look at what we're dealing with here. First things first, the seller is upfront about the fact that this Caprice doesn't run. That's right, folks. This beauty is currently a non-starter. And if that wasn't enough, the seller also mentions that the block may need to be rebuilt. So if you're not handy with a wrench or don't have a good mechanic on speed dial, this might not be the project for you. But let's not write this Caprice off just yet. The seller does mention that the car is in good condition overall, which is a bit of a head-scratcher given the whole doesn't run thing. But hey, maybe they're just an optimist. Under the hood, you'll find a classic 8-cylinder engine that's ready to roar. Once you get it running, of course. And with rear-wheel drive and an automatic transmission, this Caprice is a true American classic. The odometer shows just 68,709 miles, which is relatively low for a car of this age. But given the mechanical issues, it's hard to say how much life this Caprice has left in it. Cosmetically, the car looks to be in decent shape. The green paint job is a classic 80s color that's sure to turn heads, or maybe induce a few chuckles depending on your perspective. And the sedan body style is perfect for those who need a little extra room to stretch out. Now, I know what you're thinking. $3,000 is a lot of money for a car that doesn't even run, and you're not wrong. But if you're a true car enthusiast with a love for classic American iron and a knack for turning wrenches, this 1985 Chevrolet Caprice could be the project you've been waiting for. Just imagine the satisfaction of bringing this beauty back to life and cruising down the highway in a piece of automotive history. Sure, it might take some blood, sweat, and tears, and a whole lot of cash, but the end result could be truly spectacular. 6. We've got a real blast from the past on our hands, a 1983 Oldsmobile Cutlass that's been hiding out in a garage for over 25 years. This classic ride is up for grabs on Craigslist for just $3,000. But before you start reaching for your wallet, let's take a closer look at what we're dealing with here. First things first, the seller is upfront about the fact that this Cutlass is in fair condition. Now, in the world of classic cars, fair can mean a lot of things, from a little surface rust to a full-on restoration project. But hey, at least they're being honest. Under the hood, you'll find a rare gem, a GM 4.3 diesel V6 engine. Now, I know what you're thinking. Diesel in a Cutlass? But hear me out. This engine is known for its durability and fuel efficiency, and the seller says it runs great and doesn't smoke. So, if you're looking for a unique powertrain option, this might be the car for you. The automatic 3-speed transmission is said to shift well, which is always a plus. And with 4 doors, this Cutlass is perfect for those who need a little extra room for passengers or cargo. Now, let's talk about the interior. The seller admits that it's rough, which is to be expected for a car that's been sitting for over 2 decades. But here's where things get interesting. The rest of the dash is apparently in the trunk, along with a bunch of spare parts. So, if you're handy with a wrench and have a vision for a custom interior, this Cutlass could be the perfect blank canvas. The odometer shows just 35,220 miles, but the seller notes that it has rolled over. So, the actual mileage is closer to 135,000. Still, for a car that's been sitting for so long, that's not too shabby. Cosmetically, the red paint job is a classic 80s color that's sure to turn heads. And with a clean title and new batteries, this Cutlass is ready to hit the road, or at least ready to be towed to your garage for some much-needed TLC. Now, I know what you're thinking. $3,000 is a lot of money for a car that needs work, and you're not wrong. But if you're a true car enthusiast with a love for classic American iron and a knack for turning wrenches, this 1983 Oldsmobile Cutlass could be the project you've been waiting for. 7. We're diving into a classic ride that's up for grabs on Craigslist, a 1978 Lincoln Continental Town Car. This beauty is being offered at a price of $2,500, which seems like a pretty sweet deal for a piece of American luxury car history. Now, let's get real for a moment. The seller mentions that the car is in good condition, but there are a few things to keep in mind. The motor turns over, which is a good sign, but apparently it needs a module. The seller says they're working on getting more info about that, so it's something to definitely inquire about before making any decisions. On the bright side, the car comes with a clean title, and the seller has it in hand, so that's one less thing to worry about. Plus, it's got power windows, which is a nice touch of convenience. The odometer reads 68,239 miles, which is relatively low for a car of this age. However, it's important to keep in mind that this is a 45-year-old vehicle, so it's likely to have some wear and tear, even if the overall condition is good. All in all, if you're a fan of classic American luxury cars and don't mind putting in a little work to get this Lincoln running smoothly, It could be a great project car. Just be sure to do your due diligence, ask plenty of questions, and maybe bring along a mechanic friend to check it out before making any commitments. 8. We've got a real treat for you. A 1962 Ford Galaxie 500 that's up for grabs on Craigslist. This classic beauty is being offered at a price of $6,900, and let me tell you, it's got a lot going for it. First off, the seller has owned this car for 7 years, which is a good sign. It means they've had plenty of time to get to know the vehicle and take care of any issues that may have come up. And speaking of taking care of things, the seller has done quite a bit of work on this Galaxie. They've put in new tires, brakes, a carburetor, fuel tank, shocks, and even an alternator that looks like a generator, which is a pretty cool touch if you ask me. Under the hood, you'll find a 352 cubic inch V8 engine, which is paired with an automatic transmission. And with 89,000 miles on the odometer, this car has plenty of life left in it. Now, the seller does mention that the interior has had an older redo, so it's not going to be in showroom condition. But hey, that's part of the charm of owning a classic car, right? You get to put your own personal touch on it. One thing to note is that the seller describes the car as a solid car, which is a good indication that it's in good overall condition. However, as with any classic car, it's always a good idea to give it a thorough inspection before making a purchase. All in all, if you're in the market for a classic American hardtop with plenty of style and a strong V8 under the hood, this 1962 Ford Galaxie 500 is definitely worth checking out. And at $6,900 or best offer, it could be a great deal for the right buyer. 9. We've got a real gem to talk about, a 1985 Chrysler LeBaron convertible that's up for sale on Craigslist. Now before we dive in, let's address the elephant in the room, the asking price of $12,000. That's a hefty sum for a car that's almost 40 years old, but stick with me, because there's more to this story. First off, let's talk about the condition of this LeBaron. The seller describes it as being in like-new condition, and from the details they've provided, it seems like they're not exaggerating. The car has just 39,568 original miles on the odometer, which is incredibly low for a vehicle of this age. The seller also mentions that they're the second owner and have kept the car stored and barely driven, which explains the low mileage and excellent condition. Now, let's talk about the specs. This LeBaron is a convertible model, which is always a plus in my book. There's just something about cruising down the road with the top down that never gets old. Under the hood, you'll find a turbocharged engine, which should provide plenty of power and a fun driving experience. The car also has a clean title and an automatic transmission, which makes it easy to drive. Aesthetically, this LeBaron is a real head-turner. It's got a red exterior and a white leather interior, which is a classic color combination that never goes out of style. The seller also mentions that the car is completely original, including all the paperwork and manuals, which is a real bonus for collectors. Now, I know what you're thinking. $12,000 is a lot of money for a 1985 Chrysler LeBaron. And you're not wrong, but here's the thing. This car is in exceptional condition and has incredibly low mileage. It's a rare find, and for the right buyer, it could be worth every penny. Of course, as with any used car purchase, it's important to do your due diligence. Even though the seller describes the car as being in like-new condition, it's always a good idea to get a thorough inspection done by a trusted mechanic before making a purchase. All in all, if you're in the market for a classic convertible that's in excellent condition and has low mileage, this 1985 Chrysler LeBaron is definitely worth checking out. It's a rare find and could be a great addition to any car collection. 10. We're taking a closer look at a real classic, a 1964 Chevrolet Corvair that's up for grabs on Craigslist. The seller is asking $14,000 for this beauty, which might seem like a lot at first glance, but hear me out. First off, let's talk about the condition of this Corvair. The seller describes it as being in good shape, and from the details they've provided, it seems like they're telling the truth. The car has just 63,274 miles on the odometer, which is relatively low for a vehicle that's almost 60 years old. Plus, the seller mentions that everything on the car is original, including the paint, which is a real rarity for a classic car like this. Now, let's talk about the specs. This Corvair is a convertible model, which is perfect for cruising around on a sunny day. It's got a 6-cylinder engine and an automatic transmission, which makes it easy to drive. The car also has a clean title, which is always a good sign. Aesthetically, this Corvair is a real stunner. It's got a classic red paint job that's sure to turn heads wherever you go. The seller mentions that it's the perfect car for California, and I can definitely see why. There's just something about a classic convertible that screams West Coast cool. Of course, as with any classic car, there are a few things to keep in mind. Even though the seller describes the car as being in good condition, it's always a good idea to get a thorough inspection done by a trusted mechanic before making a purchase. Classic cars can have hidden issues that aren't immediately apparent, so it's important to do your due diligence. All in all, if you're in the market for a classic convertible that's in good condition and has a ton of original features, this 1964 Chevrolet Corvair is definitely worth checking out. It's a rare find and could be a great addition to any car collection. 11. We're taking a look at a real blast from the past, a 1971 Mercury Monterey that's up for sale on Craigslist. The seller is asking $5,500 for this classic ride, and from what they've shared, it seems like it could be a great deal. First off, let's talk about the condition of this Monterey. The seller doesn't go into a ton of detail about the overall condition of the car, but they do mention that it runs and drives excellently. That's always a good sign, especially for a car that's over 50 years old. Now, let's talk about the specs. Under the hood, you'll find a beefy 6.6L 400 Cleveland engine, which is paired with an automatic transmission. The seller mentions that the car has plenty of power and an extremely smooth ride, which is exactly what you want from a classic cruiser like this. Plus, it's got power steering and air conditioning, which are always nice features to have. Aesthetically, the seller doesn't provide a ton of details about the car's appearance. There are no mentions of the paint color or interior condition, so it's hard to say exactly what kind of shape this Monterey is in. However, if it runs and drives as well as the seller claims, it could be a great candidate for a restoration project or a fun weekend cruiser. Of course, as with any used car purchase, it's important to do your due diligence. Even though the seller claims that the car runs and drives excellently, it's always a good idea to get a thorough inspection done by a trusted mechanic before making a purchase. This is especially important for a classic car like this, which may have hidden issues that aren't immediately apparent. All in all, if you're in the market for a classic cruiser with plenty of power and a smooth ride, this 1971 Mercury Monterey is definitely worth checking out. It's got a clean title and a reasonable asking price, and if it's in good condition, it could be a great addition to any car collection. 12. We're diving into a real piece of American automotive history, a 1955 Oldsmobile 88 that's up for grabs on Craigslist. The seller is asking $8,000 for this classic ride, and while that might seem like a lot for a car that's almost 70 years old, there's a lot to love about this Olds. First off, let's talk about the condition of this 55 Olds. The seller is upfront about the fact that this car isn't perfect. It's got some minor dings, scratches, and paint chips, which is to be expected for a car of this age. The headliner has some tears at the seams, the passenger window is hard to roll down and has a crack, and the dashboard has a patina look instead of a bright, shiny paint job. However, the seller also notes that the body is as rust-free as they've seen in a Survivor car, with no holes or body cancer. Under the hood, you'll find a 324 V8 engine paired with an automatic transmission, which the seller says runs and drives well. However, they do note that the car will sometimes stall when taking off from stoplights unless you feather the gas pedal, which is something to keep in mind if you're considering this car for daily driving. One thing to note is that the odometer has rolled over, so the actual mileage of this car is unknown. The seller mentions that it shows 99,000 miles, but it's likely that the car has traveled much further than that in its 69-year lifespan. Aesthetically, this 55 Olds is a real head-turner. It's got that classic 1950s style that never goes out of fashion, and the seller mentions that everyone loves it wherever they go. Plus, the car comes with extra rear traction wheels and tires which are currently installed. Now, the seller is upfront about the fact that this car could use some deferred maintenance soon, and that it's a big car that requires a 10x20 storage unit to keep it protected. They've been paying around $300 per month for storage, which is a significant expense to keep in mind if you're considering this car. Overall, if you're in the market for a classic American car with plenty of character and style, this 1955 Oldsmobile 88 is definitely worth checking out. It's not perfect, but it's got a lot of potential for the right buyer who's willing to put in some work and give it the love and attention it deserves. 13. We're taking a closer look at a real blast from the past, a 1974 Ford Mustang II Ghia that's up for sale on Craigslist. The seller is asking $6,500 for this classic ride, and from the details they've provided, it seems like it could be a great deal for the right buyer. First off, let's talk about the condition of this Mustang II. The seller describes it as being in excellent condition overall, which is always a good sign for a car that's almost 50 years old. However, they do note a few issues that potential buyers should be aware of. The AC doesn't work, the climate control needs to be replaced or fixed, and the dash clock quit working decades ago. The hood also has some small rust dots that will need to be addressed soon, and the carpet is very faded. The trunk also needs some work to get it in tip-top shape. Now, let's talk about the specs. Under the hood, you'll find a V6 engine paired with a 4-speed manual transmission. The seller notes that the car drives really nicely and is easy to handle, but doesn't have a lot of power. They also mention that the transmission shifts very easily, except for finding reverse, which takes some practice. Aesthetically, this Mustang II is a real head-turner. It's got a classic red paint job that's sure to turn heads wherever you go. The seller mentions that many people want to know what it is because it's so rare, which is definitely a plus for collectors and enthusiasts. One thing to note is that this car does have some deferred maintenance issues that will need to be addressed. The AC and climate control don't work, the dash clock is broken, and the hood and trunk need some attention. However, the seller has provided a lot of detailed information about the car's condition, which is always a good sign that they're being upfront and honest about any issues. Overall, if you're in the market for a classic Mustang II that's in excellent condition overall but needs a little TLC, this 1974 Ford Mustang II Ghia is definitely worth checking out. It's got a clean title, a manual transmission, and a lot of potential for the right buyer who's willing to put in some work to get it in top shape. 14. We've got a real gem to talk about. A 1950 Ford Custom Shoebox convertible that's up for sale on Craigslist. The seller is asking $13,500 for this classic ride, and while that might seem like a hefty sum, there's a lot to love about this old-school Ford. First off, let's talk about the condition of this custom shoebox. The seller mentions that it's pretty complete and needs just a little work to finish, which is always a good sign for a car that's over 70 years old. They also note that it was running a couple of years ago and that their grandpa was driving it not too long ago, which suggests that it's in decent mechanical shape. Now let's talk about the specs. This custom shoebox has a 3-on-the-tree manual transmission and a 6-bolt engine, which is a classic setup for a car of this era. The seller also mentions that it has a brand new top and interior, which is a big plus for a convertible like this. One thing to note is that the seller doesn't seem to know too much about the car's history or specifics, which is understandable given that it was their grandpa's car. They do mention that the odometer reads 55,089 miles, but it's unclear if that's the actual mileage or if the odometer has rolled over at some point. Aesthetically, this custom shoebox is a real head-turner. It's got that classic 1950s style that never goes out of fashion, and the fact that it's a convertible just adds to its appeal. The seller doesn't provide any photos, but they do encourage potential buyers to come and see the car in person, which is always a good idea when buying a classic car. Now, it's worth noting that the seller has a bit of an unusual communication style. They ask potential buyers to send their phone number for a better reply, and to ask their wife or girlfriend before contacting them. They also mention that they're not looking for Craigslist friends, which is a bit of an odd thing to include in a car ad. Overall, if you're in the market for a classic 1950s convertible that needs a little TLC but has a lot of potential, this 1950 Ford Custom Shoebox is definitely worth checking out. It's got a clean title, a manual transmission, and a lot of character, and with a little work, it could be a real showstopper. 15. We're taking a closer look at a true American classic, a 1966 Ford Mustang that's up for grabs on Craigslist. The seller is asking $11,000 for this iconic pony car, and from the details they've provided, it seems like it could be a great project for the right buyer. First off, let's talk about the condition of this Mustang. The seller describes it as being in good shape for its age, which is always a positive sign for a car that's over 50 years old. They mention that the body is straight, which is a big plus for anyone looking to restore or modify this classic ride. Under the hood, you'll find a straight-six engine, which was a common power plant for Mustangs of this era. The seller notes that the car starts and drives, but could use some work to get it running perfectly. This suggests that the engine and other mechanical components are in decent shape, but may need some attention to get them in top form. Aesthetically, this Mustang is a real head-turner. It's got a classic red paint job that's sure to turn heads wherever you go. The seller doesn't provide any details about the interior, but given the car's age, it's likely that it could use some attention as well. One thing to note is that the odometer reads 71,000 miles, which is relatively low for a car of this age. However, it's always a good idea to verify the actual mileage and condition of any classic car before making a purchase. Now, the seller is upfront about the fact that this Mustang could use some work to get it in top shape. They mention that they don't have the time to put into the car themselves, which is why they're selling it. This is a common situation for many classic car owners, and it means that this Mustang could be a great opportunity for someone who has the time, skills, and passion to bring it back to its former glory. Overall, if you're in the market for a classic Mustang that has a lot of potential but needs some work, this 1966 Ford Mustang is definitely worth checking out. It's got a clean title, a straight body, and a lot of character, and with the right amount of time and effort, it could be a real showstopper. 16. We're diving into a real piece of American luxury car history, a 1955 Lincoln Capri that's up for sale on Craigslist. The seller is asking just $5,500 for this classic ride, which could be a steal for the right buyer who's willing to put in some work. First off, let's talk about the condition of this Capri. The seller is upfront about the fact that it needs restoration and complete upholstery work, which is not surprising for a car that's almost 70 years old. They describe the overall condition as fair, which suggests that there are some issues that need to be addressed. However, there are also some positives to note about this Capri. The seller mentions that the chrome is beautiful, which is a big plus for a car of this era. They also note that everything is there, which suggests that the car is relatively complete and hasn't been picked apart over the years. Under the hood, you'll find a V8 engine, which was a common power plant for luxury cars of this era. The seller mentions that the engine doesn't want to turn on, despite cranking, which could be due to the fact that the car has been sitting for a while. This is a common issue with classic cars that have been in storage, and it may be a relatively easy fix for someone with mechanical skills. The seller also notes that the transmission works okay, which is a good sign. They mention that they've changed the electrical system to 12 volts, which is a common upgrade for classic cars to make them more reliable and easier to maintain. One thing to note is that the odometer reads just 60,000 miles, which is relatively low for a car of this age. However, as with any classic car, it's always a good idea to verify the actual mileage and condition before making a purchase. Now, the seller is upfront about the fact that they've lost interest in this Capri because they have too many cars. This is a common situation for many classic car enthusiasts, and it means that this Capri could be a great opportunity for someone who has the time, skills, and passion to bring it back to its former glory. Overall, if you're in the market for a classic American luxury car that needs some work but has a lot of potential, this 1955 Lincoln Capri is definitely worth checking out. It's got a clean title, beautiful chrome, and a lot of character, and with the right amount of time and effort, It could be a real showstopper. Plus, the seller mentions that they might be able to deliver it within a reasonable distance, which could be a big plus for buyers who aren't local. 17. Let me tell you about this absolutely gorgeous piece of 80s automotive history. A 1985 Chevrolet Monte Carlo that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $10,000. And let me tell you, this one's a real gem. What we're looking at here is a beautifully preserved Monte Carlo with just 57,000 original miles. That's barely broken in for these sturdy G-body cars. It's rocking the 4.3L V6 paired with an automatic transmission, which was a solid, reliable combination for these cars. What really gets me excited about this particular Monte Carlo is its condition. It's been garage kept and appears to be all original. That's getting increasingly rare for these cars. The seller mentions it's got new tires and exhaust, which are always good updates to see. Everything reportedly works perfectly, and there's no damage, accidents, or rust to worry about. That's huge for an 80s car. The price point at $10,000 might seem a bit strong, but considering the incredibly low mileage and apparently pristine condition, it's actually in the ballpark for a well-preserved Monte Carlo from this era. These cars are starting to gain more appreciation among collectors. The seller seems pretty straightforward with their terms. No texts or emails, and you've got to see it in person in Toms River before making any offers. That's actually a good sign. It shows they're serious about finding the right buyer for this beauty. If you're in the market for a clean, original 80s Monte Carlo, this one definitely deserves a look. Just remember to do your due diligence and inspect it in person, as you should with any classic car purchase. 18. Let me tell you about this interesting 1983 Chevrolet Camaro that's currently listed for $8,800. This third-gen F-body comes in a classic red exterior and shows just 58,740 miles on the clock. Pretty low mileage for a 40-year-old car. What we're looking at here is a sport model with an automatic 4-speed transmission. The sellers equipped this Camaro with some nice features including a rear spoiler, ground effects package, and sport-tuned suspension. All the stuff that makes these third-gen Camaros look properly aggressive. Inside, you're getting bucket seats with cloth upholstery, a leather-wrapped steering wheel, and a center console setup. The 14-inch aluminum alloy wheels are period correct, and while they might seem small by today's standards, they're exactly what these cars came with back in '83. You're also getting some convenient features like power steering, power brakes, and a trunk release remote. Now, being honest here, $8,800 is sitting in the higher range for an '83 Camaro, especially without information about the engine type or recent maintenance history. The listing is pretty sparse on mechanical details, which is something you definitely want to investigate before pulling the trigger. Coming from a dealer, Highway 47 Auto Sales, you'll want to do your due diligence, get a thorough inspection, and maybe some service records if available. These third-gen Camaros can be great cars, but like any 40-year-old vehicle, they need proper care and maintenance. If you're in the market for a clean third-gen Camaro with low miles, this one might be worth checking out. Just make sure to ask all the right questions about its mechanical condition and maintenance history. 19. Let me tell you about this sweet 1984 El Camino that's currently up for grabs at $12,000. This is one of those unique car-truck hybrids that's becoming increasingly collectible, and this example looks pretty promising. What we've got here is a V8-powered El Camino with a 305 CI engine, showing just 55,800 miles on the clock. The seller's being refreshingly honest about this car truck's condition, which I really appreciate. They've done some serious recent maintenance that's worth noting. Fresh transmission rebuild with less than 1,000 miles on it, and they've got the receipts to prove it. New Uniroyal Tiger Paw tires, new water pump, fresh belts all around, and new shocks. The good stuff. It's got power windows and a power antenna, runs cool even in hot weather, that's always good to hear, and comes with a clean title and fresh smog certification. The seller claims it drives great, and they'd trust it for long distances. That's a bold statement for a 40-year-old vehicle. Now, let's talk about the few issues, because transparency is important. There's a minor oil leak that the seller believes is coming from the rear main seal, pretty common on these, and the power locks aren't working. These aren't deal breakers, but they're something to factor into the price. At $12,000, you're in the upper middle range for El Caminos of this era, but considering the recent mechanical work, low miles, and overall condition, it could be justified if everything checks out in person. If you're in the market for a well-maintained El Camino that's ready to drive and enjoy, this one deserves a look. Just make sure to verify all the recent work and maybe get a mechanic's opinion on that oil leak. 20. Let me tell you about this 1977 Thunderbird that's currently listed for $7,800. I've got to be honest, this listing is pretty sparse on details, which always makes me a bit cautious. But let's work with what we've got. What we're looking at is a white 77 T-Bird coupe with the V8 engine and automatic transmission, showing 48,000 miles on the odometer. These 7th-generation Thunderbirds were part of the bigger is better era, and they're proper American luxury cruisers. Now, the seller claims it's in excellent condition and mentions they've got over 10 in it easy, presumably meaning $10,000 in investments. But here's where I need to be straight with you. Without any specific details about maintenance history, recent work, or current mechanical condition, it's hard to validate that claim. These cars can be money pits if they haven't been maintained properly. The price point at $7,800 is actually reasonable for a well-maintained 77 T-Bird, but you'll definitely want to see detailed service records and get a thorough inspection before pulling the trigger. These cars are known for their smooth ride and comfortable interior, but they can have issues with their electrical systems and rust in certain areas. Interesting note, the seller's open to cryptocurrency payments, which is pretty unique for a classic car listing. If you're interested in this piece of 70s luxury, make sure to ask lots of questions about its history, maintenance records, and any known issues. These Thunderbirds can be fantastic cruisers when they're well maintained, but you'll want to know exactly what you're getting into.